Hey guys, how's it going? Michael Troy here. Super excited to be talking to Jim Rugg today. You know him, you love him, co-host of Kayfabe, celebrated award-winning cartoonist. I prefer the word cartoonist because I think it's all encompassing and really says what we're all about and trying to do, especially if you're a super producer like Jim Rugg doing the penciling, writing, inking, coloring, lettering, like often the design. And I'm especially excited to be talking to Jim today because it is Inktober, which means it is also Kayfabetober, which is the Kayfabe version of Inktober. And today's prompt is Jim Rugg. So, in honor of Jim Rugg Day, without further ado, welcome, Jim. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Michael. It's my pleasure. And I like this Jim Rugg Day. I could get used to this.
That's of course my first question. How does it feel? I just woke up LA time a little bit ago and I've only seen a couple, but how does it feel to see like all the Jim Rugg art for Kayfabetober today? It must be a little gratifying.
Yeah, it's a little surreal. It feels great. It's a lot of versions of my characters maybe surrounding me and stuff, at least the images that I've seen so far. I did see
Uh-huh.
one that was an AI generated Jim Rugg piece, which was very strange, but kind of caught the likeness of me, and it was done on notebook paper or on lined paper, or I guess just lined digital background, I suppose. I don't think the AI is actually using real paper, but it did connect the notebook part of my body of work. So it's been kind of weird, but mostly fun.
I'm imagining the ones of actual drawings of you are probably the most I don't know the right word to say, but like one of my favorite indie cartoonists, one of my friends, Dr. Ben Anthony, I think he was drawing you. And honestly, it looked like he had just finished watching a couple of episodes of Dahmer or something. It's
Oh
pretty
no.
scary. So be on the lookout for that.
Yes, I will. That doesn't sound like a good one.
No, I mean, it's cool. He's a great artist. So it's just a little disturbing, but art should be disturbing, don't you think?
There's a place for that. Absolutely. Yes.
So I recently saw, I mean, of course, we're going to talk about grand design a lot because grand design's coming up soon. I think you told me it was ready for Christmas. It'll be ready for Christmas.
I think Marvel has pushed it back to January. So
It'll be ready for New Year's.
that's right. There you go.
Well, that's good. Is your end done as far as the design of the package and everything like that?
Yes, I turned everything in. I think in July was the original deadline, and I met that deadline, and so it's been out of my hands for a couple of months now, and I am as eager as everybody else to just see a hard copy. I can't wait to actually get this thing in front of me because it is different than the comic book. It's much bigger, the package. It's like the 1970s Treasury comics that Marvel and I guess DC published a version too. If you've seen X-Men Grand Design or Fantastic Four Grand Design, that's the format. So, it's this big oversized book, and I'm super excited to actually see the Hulk comic in that size. The first ones they published, the X-Men and Fantastic Four, I think are beautiful. I love them. But the Fantastic Four in particular, I felt like that book was almost a whole different comic compared to the comic book sized version because it was so dense. And just seeing it at that size, there's something about it. We joked early on with Ed's X-Men Grand Design about how that Treasury edition, it's almost like comic book size for adults. So I'm very excited to actually see the hardcover or the, I guess it's not a hardcover, but the collection. I'm very excited to actually see a print copy of that, and it can't get here soon enough for me. I'm kind of I often joke and say I'm the first one in the kayfabe effect line, and I feel like it's true for the Hulk Grand Design book as well. I'm really looking forward to seeing a copy and really looking forward to seeing people get those copies because I think it's the best thing I've made so far, and I'm eager to get it out in front of fans and see what they think.
Yeah, I actually have the Treasury X-Men Grand Designs, and they are beautiful. And I have to admit, like when this whole project was coming out, and I don't think it was like announced yet, like exactly the format that it was coming out, your Hulk Grand Design. And one of my misgivings was the fact that it was coming out in like normal size at first. I was like, oh, this is sort of like a home a home release before releasing it in the theaters. Like I almost waited like until the Treasury came out because I was like, this needs to be large, this needs to be grand, this needs to be big. And so I'm very excited. But of course I couldn't wait because like, who can
Yes.
wait? So I had to read it and it is amazing. But I do see the potential for even bigger greatness in the larger format because I love these huge comic books. I just love them. I know that they're not practical, but as far as storage, and I think that's what deterred people. But in the past, but I think people are getting away from that. I'm seeing different formats and sizes, and people just kind of doing what they want. And I think that that is a good thing because evolve or die or whatever. And one of my indie comics friends pointed out like the standard comic book size is just ridiculous because it's not very practical. And it's funny, it's not very accessible or user friendly either, because whenever I'm doing a fan project, I'm always like, okay, what dimensions do we need? And everyone's like, we have no idea. And I'm like, oh, that isn't right. We should have like a default or go-to.
Yeah, it's very true. I think that comic book format size was based on like an old printer kind of model, really, I mean, the comic book format is based on this was the cheapest size and format to produce. So I think it had to do with broadsheets being, cut down, getting 4 or 8 pages out of a broadsheet. And it's not a size that you see anywhere else. Like people, when you're a kid, you're drawing on like printer paper, 8.5 by 11, which is not the size of a comic book in terms of that ratio, that 2:3 ratio of comic books. So it is kind of a peculiar size, comic books. If you're a comic book fan like me, you probably have nostalgia for that format and size. But outside of comic books, like most, printed materials just aren't that format. So yeah, it's interesting that still exists and that it's very popular as a comic book, but it's the practical side of it, I think, disappeared decades ago.
Yeah, for sure. So the Grand Design Hulk Treasury, is there a lot of additional info or material? I would imagine there would be coming from Jim Rugg. So
yeah, absolutely. I think there's about 40 extra pages. So you're going to get everything that was in the comic books, although a lot of that stuff has been tweaked. A lot of times I am curious to see these books come back from the printer because I'm trying different things with colors or with reproduction. And then once I see them in print, maybe I make further adjustments. So, I did make probably 40 or 50 minor changes to color, to details, backgrounds, possibly a couple of typos that I found to correct. Pretty minor stuff, but little adjustments here and there on what was already published in the comic books. In addition to that, there are about 40 pages, which include background material, including like some of my preparatory drawings, notes on my original proposal and my connections to the Hulk. If you remember, the X-Men and Fantastic Four Grand Design collections would have like older material that was reissued, recolored, represented because it was, kind of part of the history of those characters in the books and part of the celebration of what those characters and history was. So I continue that tradition in Hulk Grand Design. And I have a little bit of a twist on that. I don't want to give away too much, but you're going to see things like Frank Miller's Hulk and Neil Adams' Hulk, and some of these classic comic book artists doing their version of the Hulk. Because for me, one of the big pieces of the Hulk story is how much the Hulk changed visually from artist to artist. And if you've seen Hulk Grand Design, the comic books, hopefully you see me celebrating these different artists and their visions. And so I continued that with like my gallery of some of the great Hulk renditions of the past. I'm reproducing some of my original art at scale to make like end pages and, little details, things like chapter breaks. I'm just, like I said, I am the designer of the book collection, and I think it's one of the best books that I've made overall. So I put a lot of care into kind of the layout of the book itself and what those extras are. And I think there's a lot of graphic punch that comes with those extra pages. In my mind, I like to imagine this book as like, if you've never bought a Hulk comic, this is the book for you. And if you're a longtime Hulk fan, this is the book for you. And my challenge was to make this something like a coffee table book. If you're a person who buys these good looking books or collections to show off, this should look good on your coffee table, and it will definitely attract attention. If somebody comes over to your house and sees this book laying around, because one thing I tried to do and Marvel agreed to, I used fluorescent green on the covers. If you look at the X-Men and the Fantastic Four grand designs, I tried to make a book that would fit in with them, and they have sort of these big flat color areas on their covers, which I think works really well for being attention grabbing and standing out on a shelf. And I wanted to keep that idea, but even turn it up like to 11. And so using fluorescent inks on the cover was something that I was thrilled when Marvel said yes to, because to me, that's really going to give that book a little extra punch on the shelf next to everything else.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like when The Killing Joke came out and it had like that acid green like logo on the cover, like that stood out. So I can imagine going into a comic shop or wherever fine comic books are sold and seeing a huge neon green, sickening acid green eyeball like staring at you from the back of the store will be amazing and hopefully garner the attention that it deserves. And I love the cover, the big transformation eyeball that is so iconic and so attached to, I think I had mentioned to you, and one of the most exciting things about the whole grand design project for me was, and I feel like this is why you're the perfect person for it, because you brought this kind of enthusiasm. You really reminded me and probably a lot of other people like why we love the Hulk so much. I feel like because before I probably started reading Hulk with like John Byrne's run and maybe fell off, but then definitely consistently through Peter David's run, like is pretty much my Hulk. And then, but before that, I remember just being a huge fan based on, the old cartoon or the TV show, of course. And Hulk is just like such a fun character. We just like love monsters. So I feel like this is such a great project to reignite like that sort of love for the Hulk. And like you said, like I honestly think like anyone could pick up that book and just enjoy it and not have to worry about continuity or anything like that. You know what I mean? Plus it's just gorgeous. I mean, it's beautiful. And I think that what does stand out about your Hulk, your design, grand design compared to the others is I feel like in a way, like it's less straightforward. I feel like you definitely were fanboying a lot as far as like, this is my opportunity to draw like McFarlane's Hulk and I'm going to make it worth everything I've got in me. You know what I mean? I just think like your enthusiasm just like leaps off the page with it. It's such a great project.
Thanks, Michael. It's great to hear that, because enthusiasm is something that I respond to in people's personalities, in in their work, and it's something that I want in my work. I don't want to make comics that feel like work to me. I want to make comics that I'm like waking up ahead of my alarm clock because I'm so excited to get to the drawing board and draw these things. And Hulk was that project for me. Marvel was very supportive, but also gave me a lot of freedom, and it allowed me to really make a comic that I wanted to make and a comic that I was excited to get to the drawing board and draw. And I'm glad to hear that that's coming through, and what you're seeing as a reader. So that's exciting. I'm glad to hear that enthusiasm part. I've heard a lot of people, like it shows. I just got back from CXC this past weekend and talked to a lot of fans there. And a word that came up again and again was fun. And that's what I want, because like the first half of those Hulk of the Hulk that I cover, it's stuff that I think of as like how I thought of the Hulk when I was a kid, where he's fighting other monsters, and it was fun. It was an escape. It was something that I look back on fondly for those reasons. And I would hope that that's in those pages. And you mentioned, it's something people can pick up and not worry about continuity. And I think there's a freshness with the Hulk in comic form that has not yet been captured by like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think we've seen glimpses of the Hulk being super cool, but the Hulk's a character that they haven't quite made the definitive movie about yet. And in a way, I think the Hulk, at least so far, works best in comics. And so it's a chance to maybe, take the enthusiasm that people have for the Marvel Universe and the cinematic universe and kind of show them a version of the Hulk that they might not know yet. And hopefully we'll make him one of their favorite characters if he's not already one of their favorite characters.
Well, did you watch Werewolf by Night yet?
I haven't seen that. No.
Oh, it is so good. And it's funny because the only reason I bring it up because it's like an homage to like the Universal horror movies. It's done in black and white. It's done very well, in my opinion. I really enjoyed it. And, there's a few cameos from some unexpected like Marvel horror characters. And, but I feel like Hulk would work very well because I mean, he's very comparable to like Frankenstein in a way. Um,
There was
and
a whenever I was a kid reading Hulk, it was during the Peter David run, and there was a crossover with Werewolf by Night. Kevin Nolan drew the cover, and it's like a really cool cover. But at that time, Hulk was turning into Hulk at night, so it was kind of like a good matchup for a character like Werewolf by Night. Also a character that the fun part is coming out at night. So yeah, I think there are definite scenarios where the Hulk and Werewolf by Night would make good team ups or enemies or crossovers, whatever, however you want to put them together. I think they fit.
I was thinking because now that you're in bed with Marvel, you have your foot in the door. I mean, it's led to a few like I've seen your X-Men Legends. I think you did a variant cover for that, and then upcoming, which was very exciting to me just because of the and it must have been for you in a way to do the variant cover for Chris Claremont's Extreme X-Men miniseries. Issue 2, you did a cover to the classic X-Men #1. So how fun was that? And what, like, was that something you came up with, or was that an assignment? They were like, we need an homage. We need you to do a Jim Rugg or
Yeah, they came to me with that idea of homaging the classic X-Men 1 cover. And of course, that's great. It's Jack Kirby, like
I
I've done
know.
a lot of these homage covers for various things, and they're a very interesting way to spend time with like an artist or an iconic cover that you love, because you're really looking at them and seeing like, how are they actually put together and what makes this work or what makes this iconic. And anytime that's Jack Kirby, I'm going to learn a lot. So
Yeah.
that was a very fun cover to do. And the other X-Men, the X-Men Legends cover that you mentioned, that was one that I drew with ballpoint pen, which is another style that I think a lot of people are familiar with me drawing that way. And that's always a fun thing to do too. It's a little bit outside the usual comic book making tools, but in this day and age, like you can really draw with anything. So I've kind of fallen in love with the ballpoint pens again. It's something I used to draw whenever I was a little kid. Again, going back to this idea of fun and kind of enthusiasm on the pages. So yeah, those X-Men covers have been a lot of fun, and I've gotten pretty good feedback on those as well. I think people recognize that, the fun, whether it's an homage to a classic cover like Jack Kirby, or it's just fun playing with the materials, drawing on notebook paper with pens that everybody can relate to that. Like we've all doodled in the margins whenever we were supposed to be paying attention in class. So, I think that's something that fans pick up on whenever they see those kinds of covers.
But your ballpoint pen drawings are next level. I mean, they look, like fully rendered, almost paintings. They're really gorgeous. And you do have an amazing, I think in whole grand design, you do a ballpoint pen page in there. That's what I love about it. Like all the mixed media, it's very, like Elektra Assassin in that regard.
Yeah,
So
I guess this is just an audio podcast, not video, but for you, Michael, you can see over my shoulder the Elektra Assassin poster. So when you say Elektra Assassin, that is a book that is very near and dear to my heart, and definitely the artwork in there is a big reason why.
Oh no, this will be on YouTube. It'll be
Oh,
video.
okay.
So yes,
Well, then
don't.
everybody can see that Elektra
Yes,
Assassin. I wear Bill Sienkiewicz influence on my sleeve.
yes, I love Bill Sienkiewicz so much. It's interesting because I just talked to Chris Ryall recently, and I love all kinds of art talk. And he had mentioned that in interviewing Bill Sienkiewicz, he discovered his influence for the character Warlock was actually Sergio Aragonés
Oh,
because
wow.
all the like silly grin and stuff. And I was like, that's freaking amazing. Like, who knew that like that would be the inspiration? And that's kind of the fun of it too. Like, I think of someone like, you and like your hero, Jack Kirby, because Jack Kirby did so many amazing things, basically chained to a desk in a basement. And that just shows like the power of comic books. Speaking of format and stuff, I know like you and Ed talk a lot about like process and just, layout and just the mechanics of comics. And one of the things that really chaps my ass, I feel, in modern comics, like I see them like we don't have thought balloons, you know, we don't have as many captions, we don't have. I saw someone saying we needed to get rid of sound effects, and I was like, well, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, because I feel like there's this push to make comics more cinematic, but you know, show me a Kirby comic book that isn't cinematic. You know what I mean? And it has plenty of sound effects, thought balloons. I mean, I kind of like being able to get inside Peter Parker's head and listen to his crazy thoughts. You know what I mean?
I'm with you 100%. And, you know, I don't think every comic needs all of those things. If you want to, if you're a creator and you don't want thought balloons, don't put thought balloons in. But I think the idea that there's some mandate or thought balloons are bad for comics overall, I find that preposterous. You know what I mean? Like, to take away tools that you have at your disposal, and especially things that are part of the comics language, I think it's just silly to say that, you know, we've outgrown thought balloons or captions or sound effects. That said, I mean, I know many cartoonists that I respect their work and admire their work and think highly of them that are critical of some of the elements of cartooning, you know, whether it's word balloons being an awkward fit or sound effects being strange. You know, I like that stuff. I don't really trying to think if there's anything in comics language that I look at and think we should get rid of. But in my mind, I look at them and, you know, like sound effects to me are these amazing graphics. You know, they're part of what I like visually in comics pages, just from a purely aesthetic purpose, you know, standpoint, if not, you know, a functional one, although I do think they function well. So I have heard people talk about what you're describing. But I don't know, you know, like if I would leave it up to the cartoonist, maybe leave it up to the story, whether or not you think these things fit and whether you want to use them or not. But the idea that like, let's get rid of this or that element, I don't understand it.
Yeah, I know it is strange.
I mean, purely as a fan, I want all that stuff. Like I say,
too.
I love sound effects. I always think about just doing like zines where I'm just collecting my favorite sound effects. You know, it's
I know.
I certainly don't want them to go away.
Yeah, I know. They shouldn't, for sure. I know. I know it's bad enough. Like, because I've been talking to people about like artist editions. You guys just covered the Todd McFarlane artist edition, and I actually had to stop watching halfway through because mine is on the way, and I'm like, I don't really want this spoiled. So, but I love artist editions. I know that you guys love artist editions, and obviously have a huge reverence and respect for them. I feel like they're such a great, almost educational tool, and such like an artistic footnote, and such a grand opportunity for an examination of the actual art. And that's the closest most of us will ever be to, you know, holding an original Kirby page. So be able to see it with the coffee stains and the Scotch tape and all that stuff is so amazing. But I was thinking, because I didn't know if each project would support itself on its own, but a grand design artist edition with you, Ed, and Tom would be freaking amazing.
I agree. Start the petition, man. Let IDW know that you guys want this, because I agree with you. I think I could see that working well. And whenever you get that fan petition going, include me as the designer for that book, because I would love to work on that canvas, you know, on a canvas that size. You know, one other thing I would add about the artist editions is I think it's one more way for us as fans to look at work that maybe we've loved our whole lives or we've read many times in comic book form or trade paperback form. Those artist editions are like one more way to experience that work. And I think that can be very enjoyable for, you know, for people that aren't just using it as a, say, educational tool. You know, I look at these artist editions, like you say, and I think I can learn a lot from seeing reproductions of masters' original art. But I think even if you're not trying to make your own comics, you can appreciate these artist editions just as like a different way to enjoy a classic storyline or an artist that you've grown up reading. And you know, this is a chance to kind of see it with fresh eyes and through a slightly different perspective. I think that's a really nice piece that artist edition bring us fans. And, you know, with that in mind, like one of the things I took away from the Hulk Grand Design, because I read, you know, 500 issues of the Hulk over and over. And it was the first time I've ever read that kind of a run that spanned really decades and reading everything. And it was very enjoyable. And I thought at the time, you know, if you're a longtime fan and you have a favorite character, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, whatever, I would encourage you, because now you can get access to these issues through digital and reprints and stuff. Go back and take that favorite character and read their whole run. It's really interesting to see how they evolve over time, and to be able to read it, you know, over the course of a couple of months or something. It can be once again, a new way to appreciate this stuff that you may be a fan of, but maybe you think you've read all of the Fantastic Four that you need to read. Read it in order and see how that feels, because it was a very different experience for me with the Hulk.
Yeah, it must have been almost like a mushroom trip. I mean, to go from
weird.
like, did you really read like 500 issues of the Hulk? That's so crazy. I mean, of course, obviously you have to, you would be like a huge asshole to like not do that research. But I mean, that must have been so crazy, because I do remember you talking about the process a little bit, and you said a lot of like the first chunk of it, some of it was hard to get through because nothing really happens.
Yeah, there's not a change of the static quo. I always say, like, you know, the first 10 or 20 years, those books are written for 7-year-olds. And so to read 20 of those a night in order, it's strange. You know, it's almost a form of brain damage or something. When you say a mushroom trip, yes, it's definitely something different. But, you know, that's part of that experience too, because I don't know if I would appreciate things like Bill Mantlo when he comes on board and he starts kind of pushing the Hulk maybe to a slightly older, more mature reader, or more complex, sophisticated stories. I might take that for granted if I hadn't read the first couple of decades. You know, same with the Peter David stuff. And it's one of the things that's interesting is just seeing like how these characters and how the storytelling changes over time. You know, as new creators come on board, and really as the audiences become more sophisticated and more, you know, around for longer parts of the characters' histories, I think that has forced those books to evolve over time too. So it's very interesting and very entertaining. But like you said, those first several years, first decade or two, whenever they're written for very young readers, it can be strange to read those, you know, in order all at once. You know, they were made to be read one a month and for kind of standalone reading experiences. So to sit down and read them all at once is definitely unusual.
So it's, speaking of Marvel, and this is something I mentioned to you before, which is like I, you know, speaking of like putting things out in the ether, like the Grand Design Artist Edition, which I have Scott Dunbier coming up for an interview soon, so I will happily drop that in his ear. But like I thought, you know, since comic books is so cyclical, and you know, it's like we see like the new versions of Age of Apocalypse, or what are, you know, the Dark Phoenix coming back and dying again for the umpteenth time, and just things like that. But I thought it would also be fun to do different things, like do Marvel Knights 2.0 and have you and Ed be like the Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti, and bring your like Marvel Knights. Or I thought like a Heroes Reborn by Jim Rugg and Ed Piskor would be actually pretty amazing too. How do you feel about those kinds of fantasy projects?
I hadn't given them much thought, Michael, but it's an interesting idea. You know, I think both of those are pretty interesting ideas. And quite frankly, I'm surprised that we haven't seen that done. You know, there's a lot of talent in comics these days, and those models have been pretty successful. You know, whenever they did the Heroes Reborn, for instance, I believe the Avengers was the best and is still the best-selling Avengers comic book ever released. You know, so there is precedent for this kind of experiments, and they have been successful. Obviously, Marvel Knights led to Joe Quesada taking over as editor-in-chief. And I don't think anybody can argue with the success of Marvel over the last, you know, 20 years or so since Joe Quesada took over. So yeah, it's surprising to me that we don't see more of that kind of experimentation. And especially since Joe Quesada was in charge of Marvel Comics for those decades, it's surprising that he didn't look at his own experience and say, hey, that worked pretty well. Why don't we try that again with somebody? You know, I don't know if I'm the guy for that or not, but I am surprised it hasn't been done more, just because, again, those couple examples do both seem very successful.
I feel like things have shifted so much in the industry, because I feel like if something like this would have happened maybe 10, 15 years ago, like we absolutely would be getting like at least a run from you on the Hulk by now. You know what I mean? I feel like those kind of things were always so organic. Like somebody does one project and they're like suddenly the guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's funny, because I felt it's like, because I started out as a fan of like your YouTube channel. And then, of course, listening to you guys talk and commentary, and, obviously you're always mentioning your current projects and stuff. So I started getting into your works and stuff. And I thought, wow, you've got such a huge, like, respectable, amazing catalog of work. And now that you've done grand design, though, you'll always be known as the Hulk guy. Do you know what I mean?
That's interesting. That's good. That's a challenge, like that's on my shoulders now to do something that eclipses my Hulk run. And hopefully I'm up for that challenge. I will certainly try my best to be known for something besides the Hulk guy, but it's all right to be known as the Hulk guy for a while. I'll take that.
Well, one of your cool ass projects that I came across, once again organically because of interest, because I'm so like the Alex Ross Fantastic Four book with the crazy colors and like the renewed interest in the black light stuff. And then I had heard the title and saw you mention it, but I didn't really know what it was about until I got into it. Your book, Octobriana, it's on my list to acquire that. Like anything I've seen from that is amazing, and it speaks to your desire to like produce and design and everything. So you wanted to do a blacklight comic book, and that was it. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. That book happened while I was working on Hulk. I had started working on Hulk and we didn't have the contract finalized. And so I had to stop working on it while we worked out our details. And in that break, I drew Octobriana because I didn't want to do nothing. And as you say, it's a blacklight comic. It was made with special ink to get that blacklight effect. And I had been doing screen posters that were blacklight posters. That's why I had the idea, like, we could do the same ink, but we could do it in a comic book. And I talked to Ad House Books, who I've published with a lot, and I always say is like my print guru. And I gave him the idea of how I thought we could print a blacklight comic, and he thought about it and he said, "Yeah, I think that'll work, and I'll publish it." And so it was like, all right, this is a great plan. And it took me almost a year to figure out a story that I thought made sense. Because when I think of blacklight stuff, I think of the 70s and kind of like the underground head shops, So I wanted a story that had that feeling. And eventually Octobriana became the story. And I drew the comic, and the plan was Ad House was going to publish it, and I was going to just take it to comic book shows. Because it's hard to do surprises nowadays, with everything being listed months in advance in the previews catalogs and advertised ahead of time. So everybody knows what's coming up so you can pre-order it. I wanted to do something that if you came to my table at a comic book show, you would see something completely new, something you've never seen before. And it'd be like the fun surprise that I used to get every week when I'd go to the newsstand in my town and wasn't sure what was coming out from the comics. So that's what I was going to do. And that was in early 2020, spring of 2020. And as I was finishing the book, that's whenever the lockdown happened. And so all of the comic book shows that I had scheduled for that year were, canceled, and ended up doing a crowdfunder because I didn't know how else to get this book out to the public. And the crowdfunder worked really well. It was a Kickstarter. It was my first Kickstarter. And that's kind of how Octobriana came about. But my idea for it, for anyone unfamiliar with Octobriana, is it was published in a book in I think 1969. There was an author who said this was done by a group of Russian, student activist kind of people, and Octobriana was the spirit of the revolution, and it was opposed to the Soviet Union. It was this Russian character, but it was against the regime at the time. And there was a whole backstory about these students who were making these comics, and they were inspired by American superhero comics. That was the Octobriana characters, sort of the superhero, but a Russian superhero. It turned out that was not true. It was all a hoax that the author had fabricated. He had stolen art from these a couple of artists from Czechoslovakia, and published it in this book about Octobriana. And it was not true, but it was a compelling story. And my idea was, imagine that the American underground cartoonists found out about Octobriana, and in a move of solidarity, they made an underground comic, you know, in America about this character. And so that was my idea behind the Octobriana 1976 blacklight comic book.
That is one high concept. And I
Yeah.
love it. That is amazing. Well, you do have to have like some, like, I'm glad that you put the thought into that, that like the story has to match the aesthetic to that level. And I cannot wait to read it. Is that standard comic book size?
It's standard comic book size, and you know, it is printed with fluorescent inks, so it does glow under a black light. I ended up doing 3 versions in all, because it was a Kickstarter. You needed to do like a digital copy. That's pretty standard for a comic book Kickstarter. And what I found was that the fluorescent colors didn't really work on screen. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, how do I make this comic look really cool on screen if you're just buying a PDF? And I ended up doing different versions. I did a black and white version, and I did because it's set in the 70s, I did a version that looks like it was published in the 70s with kind of like newsprint paper. And, you know, the colors are a little bit like faded and bleeding into the newsprint and stuff like that. I call it the retro edition, and ended up doing print versions of those things, because at first it was just the digital versions. And I was posting pictures of what they looked like. You know, if you bought the digital version, you would get kind of a very saturated version that was supposed to be like the black light. You would get a retro version that looked like it was an old 70s comic, and you would get the black and white version, just because I love like the 80s black and white comics.
Right.
And when people saw the pictures, they were like, well, I want a print version of the black and white edition, or I want a print version of the retro edition. And because of the way Kickstarter is set up, I realized it's like pre-orders, you know, and I said, you know, I can make that available, and if you want it, add it to your to the rewards. And I got enough pre-orders essentially for it that I was able to offset print the color, the retro edition, which means it was like a very nice print job. And for the black and white edition, I had enough of a budget that I could actually print it on a web press, which is how comics used to be made, but very few comics are printed on a web press today. It's part of the reason that we don't see cheap newsprint comics, because you can't really do newsprint on an offset machine because it's thin. It doesn't really work the same way, but it works on a web press. And from the Kickstarter, I had a little budget, and I was able to get a quote from a printer that still uses web presses. And so my black and white version of Octobriana, I call it 1986, is like the black and white explosion comics that followed Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Anybody that watches Cartoonist Kayfabe knows I'm a huge fan of the comics of that era. And it's kind of a bygone era, you know, in terms of production. So I was thrilled to get to play with that part of it. You know, it's nice to do everything yourself, in that I like the production side. You know, I like the design side. I want to make this stuff that either you haven't seen before, or it's very much in line with, you know, in this case, like the black and white explosion. And being able to do the production is what allows me to kind of like play with those parts. And it made for a really fun project all around. You know, there was a lot in Octobriana for, again, my own enthusiasm, fun for me, and things that I wanted to do in terms of making comics. So that was a really fun project. And it's funny, I mentioned that I did it during the working on the Incredible Hulk. So there were like these starts and stops with the Incredible Hulk, or with the Hulk Grand Design. Like one of them, whenever the lockdown happened, Marvel told their artists, everything shut down. The editors stayed home. And the artists and writers were told to put your pencils down. I can't remember how long that lasted, for a few weeks or maybe a month or two. And again, in that time, I'm like working on Octobriana, you know, like anytime Hulk work stopped, I would do Octobriana. And I dated all of the Hulk pages on the back. So you can see like when they're finished, I have like the day, you know, I would just put the date on each page. And when I was putting all my Hulk art in order, when I was done with the project, there were like gaps in the production where it'd be like, oh, this is when I ran the Kickstarter, or this is when we shut down for, you know, at the beginning of the lockdown. And so it was kind of funny to go through putting that Hulk art in order and seeing like the history of what was going on in my life when I was working on that book, because there were a couple of these like interruptions.
Yeah. I know. So like all told, how long do you think it took you to put it together? Like, because it's 80 pages. I mean, I feel like that's like no small feat, you know what I mean? And that's just one project. So congrats on
It was
that.
2 years, but I was doing other stuff. It wasn't 2 years continuous. It was 2 years of like stop for 3 months. Okay, back on, stop for a month, back on. So it was 2 years, but in conjunction with some other things.
It's funny because just being a comic book fan and an artist, and I've always read like interviews with the artists over the years, and I think I have a better appreciation for it now. But I always remember artists lamenting the bad printing and how frustrating it was to like know what their art looked like and then see what it would look like when it hit the stands. Especially, I feel, because you were pretty into comics at this time during the flexographic disaster, like the first issue of Crisis on Infinite Earths coming out, and like apparently they didn't know that the plates had to be changed more often, so the blacks are looking like really gray, and you've got like this gorgeous George Perez art with like minus details and stuff on like arguably one of the most important comic books in history. So I could see the desire, especially if you have the ability to, like when you get your grand design, you can say, this is awesome. The end papers look exactly how I wanted them to. This is that, and the other. So, whereas, if you have a designer, unless it's somebody like Chip Kidd or something, you're pretty much at their mercy as far as what kind of aesthetic they want to bring to it, design wise, and things like that.
Yeah, 100%. And sometimes I think that's a good thing. If you have a good designer, they can come in with a fresh set of eyes. Part of design is sales. And so sometimes the person making the book, excuse me, sometimes we're not the best person to sell it. I remember talking to Jeff Smith, and he said, from the covers, from page one out, the covers, that's marketing. He gets to control the stuff from page one, to the end of the book. And there's some real truth there. So if you have a good designer, they're able to kind of like look at the work and really distill it down into what is it? What is its essence? And then how do you sell that in one image or in one design, one cover? So I don't think it's always a bad thing if you have a good designer. But of course, depending on where you are kind of on the ladder of importance or sales expectations or budget or something, maybe you don't get much time with the designer. Maybe it really is just get it ready for print and send it out the door, in which case definitely you're probably better off, because you're going to care more about it than the designer that's putting together 10 books that week and it's late in the Friday afternoon and they're just trying to get this thing out the door. So there's advantages either way. I always remember we looked at an interview with David Mazzucchelli in the Comics Journal. And one of the things he said that he learned in working for Marvel is you want to be the last person to touch the pages before they go off to the printer. And this could be in reference to the inker. It could be in reference to the letterer, the colorist, so if it's something that you really care about, you want to be that person that gets to look at it right before you send it off to press. And if you're doing the design, same kind of deal, like set those files up exactly the way you want them, and maybe even send some instructions to the printer, to make sure that what you have in mind is clear to whoever is going to pick up this project after you hand it off, after you turn it in. And I sent some notes along with Grand Design. I was very lucky because I worked with, I guess it's their reprint. I'm not sure of her title, but Jen Grunwald at Marvel, who oversees like the collections and the books that they publish at Marvel. And, she was great, very supportive whenever I had questions or special requests, we would talk about it. And it was nice to have the person who has experience in production being there to kind of like bounce ideas off of and say, that sounds like that'll work or whatnot. So I enjoy doing the production and design, but I don't think you have to be the designer to make a good looking book. I think you just need to communicate with that person and make sure everybody's on the same page. And design in comics has gotten so good in the last 20 years. I started really reading comics and noticing what they looked like in the 90s, and they didn't look very good, from a design standpoint. I'm not even sure most companies had a dedicated designer. they probably had somebody that would prep files for the printer, but even a lot of that stuff I think was just done at the printer. It's like, here are all the pages and, put it together. That has evolved so much. And I credit people like Tom Devlin at High Water Books in the 90s. I think Chris Pitzer from Ad House Books, I think those books, and I did a lot of work with him, as, full disclaimer, but design and production was a big part of the Ad House Books values. And I think that had a positive impact. Jacob Covey, the designer at Fantagraphics, did a lot of high profile books while he was there. And as a result, I think that comic books and graphic novels have never looked better. So, in addition to trying to make your own books look good, the competition is much greater than it used to be too. If you want that book to really pop off the shelf, you've got to do something these days to stand out. So it's a good time, I think, in terms of design in comics, but it's still a lot of work. And the better the design is overall, the greater the competition to make your book stand out.
Yeah, true. I know, speaking, it's funny because you talk about, needing to stand out and stuff. And I feel like that's a lot of the problem with, and I feel like maybe I'm just becoming a dinosaur and I'm antiquated and I'm like trying to hold on to yesteryear and the way things used to be. But like, I look at like the X-Men books now and they just all look the same to me. I feel like everyone's using like Procreate and like just like certain like things that look like obvious, like, digital tools and things like that to me. And it just isn't exciting to me. Like, I feel like the era of the superstar artist is kind of gone. You know what I mean? It's like, where's our next Todd McFarlane? Where's our next Art Adams? Where's our next, do you know what I mean? But maybe to a younger audience, like to people who actively collect the X-Men now, maybe they could probably name 3 or 4 artists, but I just feel like we're sort of, because I always used to, like somebody like John Byrne, like I would read no matter what he drew. And I just don't feel there's a lot of artists out there like that right now. Aside from like the indie scene, I feel like that's like where it's really at right now in the evolution of comic books. Like the Alex Ross book, I think it's a huge success, and I know, as it should be. And I think that I hope that opens the door for other projects like that to like give us like us older fans like me, who that was like so my Fantastic Four. I loved it. I loved, the fact that Alex was doing something different with his art that we hadn't seen from him, and it looked truly inspired and it looked beautiful, so maybe that's, instead of like a Jim Rugg monthly book, maybe a Jim Rugg Hulk book for Abrams or something like that. You know what I mean?
I do. And I want to weigh in on that because I think there's two things there. I think about what you've just described. I think about that a lot because, one, I hear about it and I feel it myself sometimes, but I think there's 2 pieces there. One is, as you become a longer time reader, you need to impress me, right? Like if I'm going to see a new book and go, oh, that new X-Men is so great. It's not just compared to the last couple of years of books now. Like I've been reading books for 35 years. Like I remember reading Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns probably within 2 years of starting to read comics. And so, many people might point to Watchmen and say that's the best superhero comic ever written. And whether, like let's say maybe it's not the best, but it's certainly highly regarded. If you read that now, in order to be a better superhero, that's what somebody's competition is. Because I've read Watchmen, and I look at that and go, that's a really good superhero comic. So if you want to impress me with a superhero comic, well, you got to be that good or better, So as you read more and more, the what's in your head, you're grading on a curve already, and it's like after 35 years of reading, like you've really got to come up with something very good and very different to kind of like move that needle at the top of the charts, because you're up against everything I've read in my life. If you're a new reader, that's awesome. You could be getting a new favorite book every week. But if you've been reading for 35 years, the competition that new book is against is going to be a little bit more stiff. And then the other thing, all of those comics, like up till, I don't know when, let's say the year 2000, that's probably not exactly right. But at some point, like Marvel, DC were the main comics that I had access to, and maybe Image Comics shows up in the 90s, and you have some indie comics here and there like First and Dark Horse and stuff like that. But those comics were all created under the same paradigm of like black holding lines, and, you know, 4-color coloring process. They were the same. They were very narrow in what you could do with those. And people made that sing. You know, you talk about John Byrne, we can all name our favorite artists that worked within that paradigm of like black ink lines with 4-color underneath it. Now it is every tool. It's every influence. You know, I really love manga. And part of what I love is the speed that you read it with. So now that's entered into the equation. There are web comics where it's like, instead of 64 colors to choose from, you have millions of colors. You have colors that didn't even really exist in our world for the first 30 years of my life. Now you can make your comics that color. And so there's no longer like this narrow bunch of criteria for what we're competing against. Todd McFarlane versus John Byrne versus Walt Simonson. And, you know, everybody that's working in kind of a very narrow model. Now that model is this. It's, you have painted comics, you have risograph printed comics, you have all digitally created comics and pencil drawn comics. And it's just impossible to really compare some of these things. It really becomes personal, you know, what you respond to, and which is different for everybody. And I think that that's a weird thing. You know, when I was a kid, people would collect, like if you were a Marvel zombie, you might buy every single Marvel comic. There were people that bought every Marvel comic because maybe there were 20 Marvel comics a month. It was, you could be on top of it. You could know all of it. And now that's just impossible. Even like, you might not even be able to buy all the X-Men books in a month. There's so much stuff that comes out, and it's a different thing. You know, when I was a young reader, it's like you could be an expert at the Marvel universe and its history and all the artists. Now nobody has that ability. Now it's just like it's exploded, and good luck trying to be aware of all the great artists. You know, whenever I was a kid, there were maybe 20 great comic book artists, you know, actively working. Now there might be 20,000, and it's impossible for us to have a consensus or to figure out like what are the best books to compare the other books to. And, you know, I think that's a good thing. Like, I just want to see, in many ways, new is better than good for me, because I've seen lots of good. I want to see something I haven't seen before. So that's a value I have, but somebody else might not have that value. You know, they might have, Byrne's my favorite guy. I want to see the best John Byrne, or new John Byrne, or somebody who's influenced by John Byrne. I want to see something I haven't seen before. So for me, having, you know, 20,000 good people out there making comics, it helps me with the new, but it doesn't help me put them in order. Like, I can't tell you anymore who my favorite comic book artist is, or who I think the best comic book artist is. It's just not, it's almost like we're all playing different sports. You know, it's so different. Some of my favorite artists.
Yeah, people who watch my channel will know that I'm slightly obsessed with John Byrne. It's no coincidence.
Nothing wrong with that.
He and my father share a birthday, not the same year, but the same date. And so I think I did call you out for it before, but and this was my own personal thing, but I felt like you really just glazed over John Byrne's Hulk very quickly and the Hulk Grand Design. And I was wondering what your thoughts on his run on Hulk were. I mean, it was brief. In your defense, it was like a blank. It was like 6 issues.
Well, that's the thing. I think that Byrne had trouble. I think Byrne quit the Hulk, and it was based on something with Jim Shooter. And so he cut his Hulk run short. And anybody that's read the Byrne Hulk run, it feels like he was laying the foundation for all kinds of stuff. He separates Banner from the Hulk early on, and Banner and Betty get married, I think, under Byrne's pencil. Yeah. And that all happens in like 6 issues. And it seems like he was setting up a lot of stuff and then just left the book. So I like what's there, but it's not very much. As you said, it was a very short run. I think it was 6 issues total. And a lot of what he sets up, he does not resolve. So it's hard to tell how that would have played out, you know, of like Banner chasing the Hulk down, or, you know, vice versa. It's hard to tell exactly what he had in mind there. And so it's hard for me to judge his run. You know, it seems like it was act 1 at the most, and maybe even like a prologue.
It's funny because I feel like the relationship between Byrne and Marvel is so strained, but you know, they have a lot of creators returning for these sort of, I guess they're calling them nostalgia projects, like Chris Claremont doing his X-Men series, which is or Gambit right now, which is really good. And I love it. It's like the best Chris Claremont in years. And I would love to see because I'm such a fanboy, but like when you said, you know, like Hulk and Banner eventually confronting each other, like, oh, Byrne, come back and give us that. Like, that would be so good right there. But he did give us the Hulk Busters. So at least we'll always have that, right?
Yeah, like I said, you know, I certainly went through my Byrne period as well. I was a Byrne victim for a while, and I was a big fan. So you know, I would have liked to have seen more of his Hulk, and I think his drawing of the Hulk stands out. I think it's really strong stuff. So yeah, it's as a Hulk fan, I'm disappointed not to have more of that. But that's the reason for me, you know, passing it quickly is just if you're covering 500 issues and 6 issues is about 1%. So, you know, in an 80-page book, that's not even 1 page.
Yeah, true. I know. That must have been difficult to pare down 500 issues of the Hulk into 80 pages and also get your little like nods to the television series in there as well, which was freaking amazing for anyone who hasn't read it. But for anyone who hasn't read Hulk Grand Design, you're actually in a good position because you have the treasury size coming your way. And if you were foolishly missed out the first time on the series, because it is amazing, you definitely need to pick up the treasury because I can't wait. Like it's going to blow my mind. My birthday's in January, so it's a good
Oh, it's
birthday
perfect.
present for me.
Yes.
So any other like envelope pushing comic books, you know, like, I mean, that's pretty ambitious. Was it a lot more expensive to print in neon? Just out of curiosity.
I don't believe it was. You know, essentially that is just a spot color. And so, you
Yeah.
know, that's pretty common in printing and offset printing. So and the fact that Marvel agreed to do it, they didn't tell me what it cost, but I assume it didn't cost too much more to add a spot color because I don't think they would have done it if it was very expensive. But you know, like the other Grand Design books, they had used the spot varnish, which is a very similar process. You know, that's kind of set up like a spot color. And the fact that they could do that, you know, it's not a very expensive flourish, I don't think, but it
Yeah.
should look super cool.
Do you have any other concepts like a Braille comic book or
Let me see. I don't have anything off the top of my head. I have some ideas for, you know, there's always some ideas for format. I often think about doing a wrestling project. And if I did that, you know, I'd like to do it as like a wrestling magazine format because that was something that was very formative to me at a young age. I can remember going to the grocery stores and you know, my parents would be out getting the food and I would hang out at the like the magazine rack and look at wrestling magazines. So that format is something that I've actually talked to a printer about in Wisconsin that does like giant web presses, and they could I'm sure that they could do a facsimile of that format where you'd have like black and white newsprint for most of it, and then maybe like a glossy full color pinups in the centerfold and like a nice glossy full color covers, and really look like those old wrestling magazines. So if I end up doing some wrestling comics, that would be something that I would probably play with in terms of format. But there's always something out there. Like printing, like everything else, has given us so many more options now than we had whenever I was a kid reading. And so, you know, you figure out the story and the content, and then you try to figure out the best way to present that. And that's design, really. That's kind of my approach to design. Take what you've made and figure out the best package to present that to the audience.
now how do you feel about like designing like for someone else, like putting together someone else's, you know, trade paperback or something like that?
It's something I'm open to.
Hmm.
It isn't something that I've done much of, but it is something that I'd be open to, you know, with the right project and the right publisher, definitely. But trying to think if I've done that. You know, I put together a collection for Fantagraphics years ago called Fuckator, and by a cartoonist named Jason Carnes. I didn't do a lot of design. Like a lot of that was kind of like pre-press and packaging, because I admire his comics, and it was kind of like just showcase his comics. You know, as the designer, that's the mandate I had for myself was, this guy's great. Just get out of the way, you know, make sure the files are good for printing and it's nice and sharp resolution. But other than that, you know, I haven't done a lot. I don't do a lot of collaboration. Most of what I do is stuff, you know, I'm writing and drawing my own material for the most part, and same with the design. But I am open to collaboration. So yeah, at some point I'll probably design a few more books for other people before I retire.
In my long-winded introduction, I use the term cartoonist. How do you like the term cartoonist, or what? Like when people ask you, like, because I feel like when people ask me like what I do, as far as my art is concerned, I definitely label it as a cartoonist, because if you just said something like penciler or something, I don't think people would know. But I feel like in a way you know, like the term comic or cartoon, I feel like some people think it diminishes it, but in a way I think it's like a badge of honor.
Yeah, I don't spend too much time on the terms, because I think I remember early days of like message boards, people would fight over the term graphic novel and comics and comic book. And it's kind of like, I have no interest in defining these terms, you know, as long as we understand what we're talking about. I usually say cartoonist when I talk about what I do. But I also don't know if that means anything to most people. I'm not even sure my parents know what I do exactly. So, you know, I say cartoonist, and then usually there's some follow-up questions necessary if the person actually cares about, wants to know more of what I do.
It is called kayfabe cartoonist after all. You know, I think you should definitely do a wrestling book. I often forget about that connection, even though that is part of the title. Maybe it's just because I have a huge respect and peripheral admiration for wrestling, but not super into it. But I think that your fans would definitely enjoy something like that. So
I think there's so much crossover between, especially the superhero genre and wrestling. You know, I think
absolutely.
There's a lot of storytelling similarities between those two. And I hear from a lot of wrestlers who are comics fans, and I know a lot of comics fans who are wrestling fans. So I think there's some overlap between those two.
Well, I mean, Lucha Libre definitely lends itself to like superhero costumes for sure. So, I mean, and isn't Spider-Man's origin directly tied to wrestling? Didn't he go to a wrestling match instead of saving Uncle Ben or
That's
something
right.
like that?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's all wrestling's fault. or we should give credit to wrestling for creating Spider-Man, I guess.
That's hilarious. It's not about responsibility and powers. It's about wrestling. It ruins Spider-Man.
That can be your what if or something.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah. Speaking of Spider-Man, you had mentioned you know, putting things out into the other people you want to get for your kayfabe shoots. And you had mentioned a couple of times, I think, Don Simpson, the great Don Simpson, who I had the pleasure of interviewing recently. And I suggested to him, since he's you know, a great cartoonist from Pittsburgh, he should do Spider-Man grand design. And while he said he was open to it, he felt like he didn't have enough knowledge of the history of the character to pull it off. And but I was like, you know, he's a big Romita fan, so I was like, just do the Romita years or something like that. I mean, so you should have Don Simpson on your show, is what I'm saying.
He is on my list. It's one of the biggest challenges of our show is scheduling, and some of it is finding whoever we're interviewing is available, and some of it's on our end. You know, we both have our own schedules, Ed and I, and that can make scheduling things for interviews a challenge. As you probably know, Michael, you know, scheduling is one of the, I don't know, the invisible difficulties of doing something like this. But Don Simpson is definitely on my list, and God willing, we will get there one of these days. And I talked to Don, you know, we talk and we're friendly, and I've known Don for quite a while. So one of these days we're all gonna get together in a room and talk about comics with a camera rolling.
I think that would be amazing, and I'm all ears when that happens, because there is never a dull moment when Don Simpson is involved, and you guys do really good shoot interviews. I appreciate the fact that you guys are always so like thoughtful with your questions, and you give so much breathing room for the answers. So sometimes, and perhaps I'm guilty of it myself, but the interviewers are usually so long-winded. I'm like, I want to hear what the artist has to say. But so you guys have done some really great uh, interviews, and I sure would love. I thought, I don't know if you guys, if you have seen the controversy between him and Rob Liefeld lately, but I know you're good friends with Rob, and you contributed to. Actually, did you? Was it a ballpoint pen drawing you did for a profit? I thought that was like such a great standout of the issue. That's kind of what I wanted to see, because, and I thought it was a great idea. So if people who don't know what I'm talking about, Rob Liefeld redid like issue #1 of Profit. I think Brigade is coming out. It didn't come out yet, did it?
I don't think so.
But you have a page in that too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and this is what we speak to, like, how you say the history of comics, like, you need to impress me because I've already read good stories. So you need to continue to impress me. So that's what I liked about your contribution, because it wasn't just sort of, a straightforward version of that page in your style. Like, you made it amazing and different and stand out by you choosing a different, what do you call it, media or whatever. So I thought that was cool.
Thank you.
Are any more of those coming up? Is after Brigade, or
Brigade's the only other one I'm aware of. But who knows? Maybe more people will do stuff like this. I think Marvel has done maybe some stuff like that, like a Fantastic Four or something.
X-Men #1 for sure, which I don't, it's so funny because I have such mixed feelings about it. It's like a cover song, or God, or like a movie remake. Like, it better be damn good. You know what I mean? So it's hard to top Giant Size X-Men #1. It was cool. It was cool enough, but
Yeah, and if you're doing it on a corporate level like X-Men, it's probably a little bit more difficult to really take chances and go out and do something far out. That's the nice thing with working with Rob Liefeld, like for the Prophet stuff. He pretty much said, push it, go do what you want. And I think the only person that you had to impress was Rob. I don't know if there was anybody else involved in like looking at those pages and deciding if somebody didn't work out. But it made it pretty easy because it was one person. Like, okay, here's my Prophet page, and what do you think? But I think if you're doing it with with a bigger company like a Marvel or a DC, you probably have a few more layers of editorial to get past. So I don't know. I haven't seen that Giant Size X-Men redo. For all I know, it's super far out. But in my experience, I feel like they're a little more conservative than if you have just one person. And I guess it depends on the person.
Well, I get ready for it, because after watching this, one of your rabid fans is going to send it to your mailbox. So
that could be.
How much mail do you guys get? Like, how many books do people send you? It must be like overwhelming.
It is. It really is. We used to do mailbag episodes, and I've seen other YouTubers that at some point they sort of say, I'm not taking mail anymore. And I hope that we never get to that point. But I did get a climate controlled storage space recently, and some of it is due to the mail that comes from Cartoonist Kayfabe. I had quite a few boxes of that stuff. It's amazing though, it's part of what I see in comics now, because so much of that is, we have so many makers in our audience, and they send us not just maybe a book that we're talking about or a book they want us to cover on the show, but a lot of them are makers, and they're sending us the books they're making. And that's amazing to see, like, what is really out there today on that creative level, in terms of production, in terms of content styles. You talk about different media. It's really amazing, and has opened my eyes to just how wide the field is now of comics, and of what people are making, what tools they're using to make them. And it's very inspiring. Like, I save this stuff because it gives me ideas too. Like, I see things that I had no idea you could do. And often I'll reach out to these creators and be like, hey, who did you print this with? Or what is this cover? Because it's just it's very exciting, and I don't know that anybody can keep up with all of it, unfortunately. But in terms of creativity, I feel like there can't be a field that's more creative than comics are right now.
Yeah, for sure. I know it's funny because you talk about the kayfabe effect and different artists and stuff like that. One of the things that you and Ed are sort of directly responsible for is a fan project called Image Grand Design, which was basically, I don't know, a call to arms or a dare from Ed and you uh, for fans to create like an image grand design based on early 90s image comics. And it's happened to coincide with the lockdown. And so there's all these artists at home working on this, and they put it together. And I sort of came into the community like at the end of this, so I missed the boat on it. But it spawned somewhat of a sequel called Darkest Image, which I think you're aware of because the amazing Barry Tan did a great Street Angel story in there that's freaking amazing. See, that's an example of like, those are like the John Burns and the Michael Goldens and the Art Adams to me. So anyway, Darkest Image had a sequel, Darkest Image 2. And I mean, look at this gorgeous Spawn cover. I don't even know who this artist is, but it's like, this is like fan art. Give me a break. And I just have to show you really quickly.
And I should say, while you're looking for your piece, I'm a huge fan of fan art. It's something that I have friends who work kind of in the fine art world and teach at some of the better art schools around. And fan art is something that I have heard fine artists dismiss outright, and some of the faculty at some of these schools. And anytime everybody's like for something or against something, I feel like that's the sign, like go the other way. And fan art is one of those things. And I've become very impressed with it. I think you can look at Hulk Grand Design through the lens of fan art. I think you can do that with a lot of comics that are produced. And if you go even further and think about like that Darkest Image as being like a product of fan art, it's amazing. Like, it's an astounding book. There are conventions of just, I think they call it amateur press in Japan, that are bigger than San Diego Comic-Con. And it's just unprofessional. It's cartoonists that aren't on the professional circuit, but are making work that is beautiful and that they love. And it's just like these passion things. And it's huge. And I find that stuff really empowering and very inspiring.
Yeah, I know. It's like I'm a huge Eric Larson fan. So my story in the first Darkest Image was a Freak Force story, because that is it. Like I feel like fan projects I'm kind of on the fence about, because on one hand I'm like, oh, you should just really be doing your own stuff, myself included. But on the other hand, it's like an opportunity. Like I would love to do a Freak Force story, but they don't really exist in the way that I love them anymore. So that was an opportunity for me to do a Freak Force story. So naturally, I had to follow it up with something from the Larson verse, and I did a She Dragon story, totally aping you, with She Dragon Grand Design. And it's only 4 pages, but I like ripped off Byrne and Miller. And I felt like for an image project, you have to get like, I stole this from you too, to have some sort of connection to the whole project. But so anyway, She Dragon Grand Design, it makes absolutely no sense, has absolutely nothing to do with the real character, but it was me just, in my fan glory. So I just thought it was fun. But like one of the things that really appealed to me about, and it ties back into your design sense, is like, it's sort of like pop image, like almost a little bit. I feel like what you did like with the Hulk Monster Madness kind of concept. Is that fair to say? I mean, like the new cover with the eyeball seems very pop art influenced in a sense.
Yeah, definitely. And, like I mentioned, I wanted it to fit with the Fantastic Four and X-Men. And when I look at those covers, I think of like very graphic treatments. And so that's what that's what I was going for. I did a lot of sketches for possible covers, but that was what I had in mind. I want to have like a big flat kind of color treatment. And again, I use the word graphic. And I can't think of a better word to describe that approach, but I do think that's in line with what you see on the Fantastic Four and X-Men Grand Designs. So I did want it to definitely fit on the shelf next to those books and feel like, they are kind of part of a series. So if you love one of them, give the next one a try. And you know, that approach, I mean, Ed figured that part out with the X-Men Grand Design was the first one. And then it was a matter of like, okay, let's create complementary designs, stuff that do unify this grand design visually. So that's what I was going for with mine, you know, something graphic, something that works. You know, I often talk about like, it now has to work when it's this big, you know, as a thumbnail on screen, as well as whenever it's the full size, you know, giant piece in your hands or on the shelf in person if you see it at your local store or at a bookstore. So those are kind of the considerations. You know, it's almost like near and far. It's got to work both ways.
Well, the good news is I think that cover would make an awesome postage stamp. So I
That'd be
think it
sweet.
does work on different sizes. So that's cool. Anything else in the pipeline coming from Jim Rugg? I know that I mean, you know, you're juggling a lot, and it's like funny because I was thinking about you, and it's like you have the three key. Like I think a lot of people ask like what it takes to be successful, or at least to have a career in comic books, and I think you definitely have three things that you need. Number one is talent, of course, like, because you really, where are you without that? Number two is that you're a nice person. Like, people don't realize that you have to maintain and establish relationships with people. You have to be nice. You have to be courteous. You have to be polite. And, like, unless you're just so insanely talented that you can be a bastard and people will like you anyway, because there are people like that. And then the other thing is you have to have hustle, and you have the hustle, like you have the work ethic. You're like giving till it hurts on all your projects and stuff. So, but you definitely have a joy and enthusiasm for it. So, but does it ever get hard to like maintain all that?
I mean, I don't think it would work if those things weren't true. And I would disagree a little bit on the nice part. I don't know that you have to be nice. I think you have to be professional. And, you know, that involves courtesy, as you say. You know, I think it is collaborative. Even if you do most of this stuff yourself, you're still collaborating with distributors and stores and printers, you know, vendors and things. In my mind, that's professionalism, you know, like don't blow up at people, or don't, you know, be a dick with everybody that you're interacting with. Deliver the stuff on time, deliver the stuff that you say you're going to deliver, which I think all falls under professional. But I agree with you on the talent or the craft part of it. Hustle, I think, is another important part. The hustle sometimes maybe gets a little bit of a burnout, but, you know, I think be true to yourself. And if you're not professional, you need to add that. You need to figure that part out. But yeah, I don't know. I don't feel, you know, it feels manageable. Like, I've had stretches that are very busy where I'm working 7 days a week, and I wouldn't want to do that forever. And certainly I get tired whenever that happens. But my enthusiasm for comics is probably higher than it's ever been. You know, I think the potential of this art form, we've barely begun to explore it. And that's really exciting to me, both as a fan and as someone participating in creating and trying to realize that potential. So I don't know, man. I find comics to be very rich, and it's not like I have experience in video game development or something, you know, like I'm sure those are very rewarding fields as well. But there's something great about comics where it can be one person, you know, and I think the best comics usually are one person, you know, one person's vision, one person's ideas. And that's the stuff I love in comics. Again, you know, show me something I haven't seen before. And what that is inside your head, or inside Grant Morrison's head, or inside, you know, Dan Clowes, or, you know, whoever it is, Matsumoto, or some, you know, there's so many great cartoonists out there working. And that's the stuff that I'm interested to see. And it's the stuff that I'm interested to make myself. So I don't know if that ever, you know, I don't know why that would ever go away. I feel like you could work your whole life and still kind of just be barely scratching the surface of what you can do with this medium.
I know, I was thinking about that recently. Like, I feel like comic books are definitely like the love of my life. You know what I mean? It's been a constant source of joy and inspiration. And I was reminded at the beginning of the lockdown, you know, when I started my own YouTube channel, and sort of really got back into like how much I love comics, and just like they are just so great and such a beautiful art form. And we are so lucky to have them. And I feel like the, you know, industry is definitely lucky to have people like you and Ed who bring a new fire to comic books and definitely keep the passion going, and just the reverence and respect you have for the art form, like from nuts to bolts, just like the creative process and also the printing. Like it's just like you're definitely an important voice in comic books, and I'm glad you're here. So
Thank you.
I really appreciate you talking to me, and I'm so happy that we had the opportunity to make up for our lost conversation. And you know, is there anything you want to share with us? Any projects coming up? Any variant covers? Any things like that?
No, I don't think so. I'm not sure when this is going to drop, but I will be in Baltimore at the end of the month. So if you're around the Baltimore area, come out to that show. It's a great comic book show. You know, if you're a fan of comics, you know, that's the focus of that show. So catch me in Baltimore. You know, you can follow me online. My social media is Jim Rugg Art on Instagram and Twitter. I have a Patreon, Jim Rugg, that you can join and download some of my out of print zines and mini comics. I do a lot of like Q&A kind of talking shop on there, share templates and things like that. So if you're into my comics, that's a place to get some more. And yeah, Hulk Grand Design, the big oversized collection will be out in January. So if you haven't pre-ordered that somewhere, go ahead and do that. That's good for me, and hopefully leads to more grand designs. You know, if we can sell enough of those, hopefully Marvel recognizes that's something to keep going, and maybe we will get that Spider-Man grand design, you know, if we can sell enough of these Hulks.
I would like to put in my bid for an Alpha Flight design, grand design by myself. I know the book that I want, I know, but I'm putting it out there. I would also like to say that I think that if I owned a comic book store, I would have a huge wall of Hulk grand design with black light over it, just to make the experience even more epic. And perhaps like a loop of the Incredible Hulk theme song playing.
Yes.
I mean, retailers, push this book, get your customers excited about it. Kayfabers, buy this book. I know that there's huge enthusiasm for this book, and I cannot wait to get this oversized puppy in my hand. I cannot wait to review it. I cannot wait to, I might even sleep with it the first couple of nights.
You know, the last thing that I would offer too is I know there's a lot of makers out there and a lot of people who maybe used to draw and haven't. And I encourage people to go back to that. You know, I think one of the great things that has come out of Cartoonist Kayfabe that I did not expect are projects like Image Grand Design and Darkest Image. I think that's a real positive way to spend some of your time and energy. And so I encourage everybody to do something creative with their free time and as a hobby or whatever, if that's the level that you're engaging with, because I do think it's a really positive way to spend your time. And I have seen that from a lot of the Cartoonist Kayfabe audience, and hearing from them, you know, as they get back into drawing or making comics or doing something that they love that is just done, you know, as like a creative outlet. So that's been kind of cool over these last couple of years. I know they've been hard for a lot of us, and it's been nice to see that, you know, making something with your hands and using your time that way can be a real positive thing to do. So I encourage people to keep that up, whether it's drawing with friends or for yourself or just for fun.
Absolutely. Well, I cannot think of a better note to end on than that. Sage words from Jim Rugg and sound advice. I love art and comic book art, and I agree with you 100%. Fan art is amazing. I have a piece of fan art in Ed Piskor's Red Room, so I'm happy about that. But yeah, I look at all kinds of art, and like even if you're doing a comic book of stick figures, if you took the time to lay pencil to paper and create this, then more power to you. So
I just talked to Matt Fiesel, who does like Cynical Man, and his characters are stick figures. So yes, nothing wrong with that. There have been some great comics made with stick figures.
My brother's girlfriend, when we were in high school, she like had notebooks full of this comic book strip that she made called Aunt Ruby, and it was like stick figures, but John Waters like level writing. Like it was disgusting and depraved. And I wish I might contact her. It needs to be published. I like, if it exists still, it's the most amazing thing on the planet. And that's what I'm saying. That's the beauty of comics, you know, from your hero, Bill Sienkiewicz, to Bill Keane at the Family Circus. There is something for everyone out there, and you can definitely find it. Comics are good. So thanks, Jim Rugg, once again. Look for Jim Rugg stuff. Buy everything. I'm going to go out and get Octobriana as quick as I can. I cannot wait to get it. I'm so excited. So
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks for making time out of your busy schedule. I really appreciate it. I know that you are spinning many plates all the time, so I do appreciate that. And I thank you. And keep watching Kayfabe. Buy more comics. What's the call to arms that you and Ed always do? Is that it? Buy more comics?
Read more comics.
Read more comics. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you buy them or not. Just read them.
Yeah, get them from your library.
All right. Thanks so much, Jim.
All right. Thanks, Michael.